admissions committees think like recruiters when it comes to short-term goals. Well, goals, but especially short-term goals. You must you must be able to get that job with an MBA. You have to think about, look at yourself from the recruiter's perspective or the admissions committee's perspective. Would they hire little Johnny or Susie applicant um, to get this job, right? And again, there will be people competing against you. Don't worry about all that, but it just has to be possible in a good way to check whether or not your short-term goals are relevant or not just batshit insane, is to go look at the school's employment reports and to see, is the company or the role that you're stating within consulting or banking or whatever industry, have those recruiters come to campus before to recruit? Go look on LinkedIn. Have there been any recent graduates or current students that are interning or have been hired at that company for that group or department, and in the role that you're stating that you want? Um, and I cannot. This can be a shocking to some people, all right, in terms of um, the next point on this slide, which is I cannot tell you how many people I've spoken to over the years where there's just a bizarre short-term goal in place, right? And I ask, what made you think that this is a good goal? Because I want to understand how people think. And they'll say, well, I wanted to differentiate myself. Well, you've basically differentiated yourself out of a job. When it comes to articulating your goals, again, you have to run with the herd. Goals essays will never, ever, especially the short-term goal, never ever be used in the eyes of the admissions committee to differentiate yourself in a positive way or differentiate the applicant in a positive way. You're just telling them that you're such an odd bird that they don't really have a seat for you in their incoming class. Even if you are a very accomplished management consultant at McKinsey and you're checking all the boxes and you have all the requisite experience, if you tell them something bizarre like I want to go become a rodeo clown or whatever upon graduation from your illustrious MBA program, the admissions committee is just going to swing the axe and reject you. Of course, I put here at the bottom, there are exceptions like HBS, Stanford, GSB, and MIT, which schools who don't really care about your short-term goal, but overwhelmingly, the number one failure mode here is bizarre, wacky, misplaced short-term goals in an essay. And that brings me to my next point and the next slide. The long-term goals. The long-term goals are also part of the equation as to why an individual such as yourself may be or get rejected. So when you're writing goals, short-term goals are for informing, right? You got to tell them this is a job I can get. Long-term goals are a bit more about who you are as a person, your passion. This is where you start to differentiate where you are, right? So now don't go off the deep end and tell them about how you grew up suffering from XYZ, or go on and on and on. Goals essays universally are to the point. They're very direct, and they're not. You don't want to tug on heartstrings too much. Right? You have to be reasonable. So long-term goals are where you can differentiate yourself, showcase some passion, and tell the admissions committee where you come from within reason. Right? You can have fun. You can be creative. You can even reach for the stars, but there is a line, and that line is crossed when you start to become disingenuous. When the long-term goals start to become more about the background and not necessarily what the goal is, that's when you're tiptoeing that line. You're overstepping a bit. So here's a little bit of an example. If every other applicant and their cousin is saying they want to start a business or start their own business, if starting your own business is the best way to share your dream and articulate what makes you tick, go for it, right? So what I'm trying to say here, even if everybody is saying that they want to start their own business, if this is truly what you want to do, and you can back it up because you have some sort of, entrepreneurial background, or even within your family, or you've dipped your toe in the entrepreneurial pool a little bit, or you've always worked for startups, and you can articulate how the entrepreneurial gene is in your blood, and you've demonstrated that, right? And it's really important to you because it creates opportunities, maybe opportunities you may have not had or people in your community may have not had growing up. Then it's okay to tell them that. And don't worry about what the hell everybody else is doing, right? as long as you have those personal reasons without going overboard and getting into dramatics or fireworks, you're going to be just fine, right? Um, that being said, what I've seen over the years, and I've probably worked with 650 people, I would say, somewhere around that. I lost count. You stop counting after 500, right? So many people invert the short-term and long-term goals. So they go exotic with the short-term goals, thus engineering their way out of a spot in any admission in any incoming class, and they go rather conservative with the long-term goal, and it's really the opposite of what one should do. Um, and it makes the admissions committee, when in doubt, always try to remember or try to understand what the admissions committee would think. You have to extricate yourself from your own brain and body and look at yourself from the outside and think, and this is very hard to do, but it's does this sound like bullshit, right? More or less. And so, oh, I'm skipping ahead too much. So it's usually fatal if you write something that makes the eyes roll, the eyes of the admissions committee reader rolls, right? It just sounds so disingenuous. That's why it's good to get feedback. So, um, of course, what I've written above doesn't even include the people who straight up forget to include their short-term and long-term goals in an essay. And that may sound crazy. It's a goals essay. They asked me to provide the goals. Who wouldn't provide the goals? So, you know, when I say the goals are missing, it's yes, they may be buried, but the short-term goals and the long-term goals, they're just not sufficiently explained, right? So listen, if you're saying in the short term, I want to go become a management consulting or consultant for McKinsey, and I want to go work in their whatever practice, right? Technology practice, technology strategy practice. You still have to explain what that short-term goal is, right? Now, you're going to say, hey, Paul, don't they know what a management consultant does in the technology practice at McKinsey? Well, hell yes, they do. The admissions committee, they definitely do. They see it all the time, but they have to know that you know what the heck you're getting into, right? And that's why, although it may seem rudimentary, you have to lay out when you write your goals in an essay. Upon graduation, I plan to join the management consulting division of whatever, making technology strategy group at McKinsey, where I will work with these types of clients and maybe in this specific part of the technology industry, hardware, in this region of the world. And in this role, I am going to gain exposure to X, Y, and Z, and go into a little more detail. How do you know what detail that is? Well, you should know because you're going to spend a lot of money at business school and a lot of time. But go find that job on McKinsey's website or on whatever job search website, or maybe look at what somebody is currently doing on LinkedIn that has the job that you want upon graduation from the MBA program, right? So it has to be the short-term goal and the long-term goal. They have to be really in their own two separate paragraphs, right? Um, anyway, so that's when you're writing something sufficiently. And really, depending on the school, at most schools besides Harvard, Stanford, MIT, you want the short-term goal to be the dominant goal, right? And I'll even add so much for my international friends that are out there who may worry about visa issues upon graduation, whatever. It is okay to add um, a backup to the short-term goal. So it would be something like this: short term, I want to go work for the technology strategy practice at McKinsey, and in this role, I'm going to do yada yada. Okay, in one sentence, or two sentences, and you say as a backup, as an alternative, recognizing the current job environment, right? As a backup, not as a competing short-term goal, but as a backup goal. Since I'm a pragmatist, I could go work in-house for uh, Google in their internal consulting strategy development division or group, right? And you want to make sure that group exists, right? So you're giving them even a more conservative short-term goal. Okay, then you can get into the long-term goal of what it is you ultimately want to do, to start up some type of whatever a software company that brings running water to every village in whatever country out there. Okay, so and then you can get into a few sentences as to why that's important to you, and how you've been involved in bringing running water to villages outside of work or through your work over the years, right? And that's when you have a complete short and long-term goal, right? And that's what I mean here by the second to last bullet point when I say, that doesn't, this people forget about their goals, right? So they're either not there or they're so paltry, like just insufficiently written. Okay. And again, last thing, vague statements of what you want to do with your life, like impact the world or make a difference. That's not goals, right? That's maybe the beginning, the very first micro step towards a goal for certain schools. But a lot of people make these vague, rather vacuous statements that I see. And I'm like, okay, that doesn't tell me what you want to do. I want to turn water into wine and walk on it too. But what does that mean? Okay. Anyway, moving on. All right, here's the second big failure mode that I see with dinged applicants. Even guys and gals that you would think, oh, you can't believe they got dinged, right? Why wouldn't Harvard want somebody like them? And really what it comes down to is that there's no personality. There's the failure to be an individual. There's a failure to stand out beyond just being an 8.5 by 11 PDF on a screen somewhere in some, uh, admissions office, right? So what I see is that many dinged elite applicants um, suffer from never showcasing what makes them a cool, unique person. And yes, believe it or not, you need to show them that. And yes, believe it or not, you may actually be a cool, unique person, at least for the purposes of this exercise applying to school. So uh, don't get caught up with talking about having a brand or billing yourself as such and such candidate. I'm the candidate with two heads, and an alligator as a pet, right? Don't worry about that. There are no unique snowflakes really when it comes to building your own personal brand. Um, just remember the admissions committee readers they're not idiots, right? They're not going to be swept off their feet by somebody who's so perfectly packaged that it comes off as a bit robotic, right? And this is a little hard to explain, but set aside your desire to sound smart or to sound like you're the super overachiever who bested everyone on some entrance exam from out of 400,000 people that one year, 8 years ago or whatever. Set aside all that stuff to describe how smart you are and how accomplished you are, and set aside the desire to write what they want to hear, and write as if you are a real person talking to mom and dad. I guess it depends on your mom and dad, but explain things as if you're explaining them to a friend and not as if you're trying to convince somebody how smart or accomplished or how much money you may have or what cool car you may drive in order to get them to like you or want to be your friend, right? Just be normal. I mean, if there's any time that you should follow mom's advice where she said, just little Johnny, little Susie, just be yourself. It's when you write these essays, don't bloviate, don't overstate, don't bullshit. D. Leopold, I think, says it best. She says, don't overthink, overcraft, or overwrite. And she's a former admissions head over at HBS. And what she's basically saying is, don't make us roll our freaking eyes, man, because we've seen it all. And really, and I've in the last 13 years, every year, inevitably somebody thinks that they are a sophisticated, um, um, like a sophisticated orator when they just come across as a bullshitter to the audience because they overstate and overwrite. All right. So instead, be a real person with real interests, with a real personality. So again, don't come across as the skeleton with no heartbeat, right? So listen, you may have all the stats and all the pedigree. I went to such and such school, and I got such and such grade. So listen, you may have all of that, right? That gets you into the game, right? Now to score the touchdown or whatever, put the puck in the net. You have to have the heartbeat. You have to have the personality. You have to have the flavor, right? And again, the first step to doing that is to write like a normal person, to state things plainly and clearly, not overstate them, and not use big words, and not like I always use this analogy. When people overwrite things, when they use 10 words when 5 would do, when they use a 18 syllable word when a two-syllable word will do. To the admissions committee reader, and again, look at yourself from the outside, it is like hacking through the Amazon rainforest with a rusty butter knife. And they just roll their eyes, and after a while, they just dismiss you as a poor communicator or a bullshitter, or somebody who's just a robot who obviously worked with the wrong admissions consultant, huh? How about that? So anyway, you got to connect with these. You got to connect with these people, and you have to understand. By the way, the admissions committee, they're not super duper brainiac PhDs holding MBAs from the most elite schools on earth. Having retired from a 40-year career running General Electric, right? Um, they're normal people who they don't want to be entertained, but they want to connect with you, right? Think of it more like um, think of it more as less of Jack Welch or Bill Gates autobiography, and more about oh, I forgot the name of more about a story of perhaps overcoming odds, right? Without being disingenuous. Okay, anyway. So and that's why essays, by the way, that talk about who you are and what you believe in and all these things. If you understand and can articulate correctly who you are as a person, you really go a long way. And that's how you differentiate yourself from the other smart, cool guys and gals out there who may be applying from McKinsey or Sequoia or Silver Lake Partners or Lightspeed or whoever, right? Okay. So anyway, I put a note in here. The cousin of this failure, um, you know, is less common, but also a problem, right? Which is I'm going to try to sound as interesting as possible. And I kind of just talked about this. And you just use weird phrasing or lofty prose, right? It's excruciating. It's the rusty butter knife in the Amazon rainforest. Okay. Um, the number one thing, and I cannot emphasize this enough when it comes to writing, is this last bullet point. You have to be able to, when you may have a very interesting background. You may be completely genuine in the character and values and personality you're trying to get across, but you still have to have clean paragraphs. Every first sentence of every paragraph is the thesis or topic sentence of that paragraph. And you must have that as the first sentence of what the paragraph is going of every paragraph, which will tells the reader this is what the paragraph is going to talk about. So you can have all the grades and everything else. You can have great goals that make sense, but if it's just not cleanly packaged, you're really doing yourself a disservice. One that might possibly get you dinged because it's at the end of the day, it's of course, what you say, but also how cleanly you say it. Okay. Anyway, um, moving on. Now, here is the biggest failure mode. I call this the big one. I saved the best for last here. But we all know, and maybe you are that person, the elite applicant who somehow genuinely elite, right? Genuinely has the stats, who somehow got dinged at every single school the year before, right? I don't actually work with those people as they're getting dinged. I see them right after. So we all know, and this may be the type A candidate worked hard, strive to make it this far in life and in the application. And these are the types of people who know enough to typically do well in the first two failure modes, right? So they have the right short and long-term goals, and they are demonstrating a good deal of personality and introspection, the right values, and good guy, good gal type thing. Somebody you'd like to have a beer with. Somebody could be in a project team with. Someone who's just executed things the right way at McKinsey or Sequoia or wherever. Okay. I'll ask these individuals when I talk to them to send me their dinged app files, right? And I'll open them up and I'll see the same exact wording between Wharton and Kellogg or HBS and GSB. Now, does Wharton know what Kellogg's writing and vice versa? The answer is no, right? But the point I'm trying to make here is that it's a cookie cutter cardboard-esque approach. And admissions committees can tell that this may not be the essay may not, they may love you up to this point, and they may be, we're being used as a backup, right? Because this essay does not demonstrate sufficient knowledge that the applicant has sufficient knowledge of who we really are as a school. And so even though we may like them, we actually don't know if they like us because we see they have everything lined up, right? Surely they're competitive at our school and at many other top business schools. So here's an example, right? A person should have cracked Booth or gotten into Booth, but they didn't share, and this is Booth specific, they didn't share their capacity for risk, right? Their capacity for pursuing the things that they genuinely enjoy, their love of learning, this is all part of the Chicago approach, by the way. We can get into that in some other conversation, but they haven't sufficiently shared that they understand what makes Chicago Booth and really the University of Chicago unique. Um, and so, what does this tell? They know if you apply to Booth, you're probably applying to Kellogg and Columbia and Wharton. So it tells Booth, yeah, man, this applicant's probably going to go somewhere else. We love this guy, but you know, um, they don't know if they're fit. They may have laid out 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 classes. They may know about, Eugene Fama, the famous professor. They may know about all these things, but these are all things that, yes, you know about the school, but they're dancing around the school's DNA, which is this is a place, Chicago Booth is a place for people who understand the life of the mind concept. And I'm not bullshitting here. This is what you have to articulate at Booth. They understand the Chicago approach. They have a love of learning, and Chicago Booth can clearly see that you know that because you've articulated it in the why Chicago, and they see it in the decisions you've made in your life. And essay 2 for Booth, I believe, asks you, tell us about the rationale behind your decisions that have led you to this point, which is, at the point, today in your life at work, and why you're applying to Booth. And if you cannot understand that and bake that into your essays, and I see this all the time, this failure mode, number 3, um, you're dead. You're done, son. So anyway, what else, right? So yeah, they like you, but they don't know if you like them. Okay. So what else? I've seen other people who didn't show their readiness at NCOD, where you kind of have to hit the ground running because it's more or less a 1-year program. There's schools like CBS where if you put in risky career goals, you tell them, man, I really don't know about what this school's all about and how pragmatic they are. And I really don't know about the learning laboratory that New York City is for CBS. Okay. Failed to hit on the Haas 4 principles. That's another big one. I mean, there's so many. Don't write about Wharton's global impact or emphasis. Whatever. Think, the think, act, reflect aspects of MIT. What I could go on and on. How much time do you have? Okay. So, um, a good application, of course, is the opposite of that. It's that easy, right? So anyway, a good application. And again, you have to understand your audience. You have to understand the way things work in the admissions committee. A good set of essays transforms the reader, the person reading it in the admissions office, turns them into your advocate, into a raving fan of yours, right? It taps into the school's DNA. It says, hey, I am one of you guys at whatever school XYZ. And if you don't do that, again, you don't have an advocate fighting for your candidacy around the water cooler or admissions committee roundtable when they go to discuss who's in and who's out, right? So, everybody has, for the most part, everybody has a little rough spots in their application. Maybe you got a C in a class. Maybe your GMAT is at or below the average. Maybe you're working in a marketing function and you have a low quant, whatever, right? Maybe you're applying in round 2 when you should have applied in round 1, whatever it is, right? Oversubscribed demographic that you may come from. Okay, so you need that advocate, you need that person fighting for you around the table, because that's where it's these little things that make the difference. And if you can demonstrate that this is the only place you've ever wanted to go, and you have to demonstrate it's the only place you've ever wanted to go. Of course, you have to have all the other stats lined up, right? Like with the points 1 and 2 that I've made in this conversation. But here, you have to have an advocate when you go in there, and you have to basically you want to know why some people who may work at the same companies that you know of and gone to the same undergraduate and have approximately same years of work experience and the same titles, what has made the difference between the two when everything was lined up, right? It's the ability to articulate personality and connect and tap in and say, I am seamless fit. The way that I learn, the way that I execute, the way that I contribute, the way that I make impact, all of that is driven by a certain, my DNA. And my DNA aligns with your fundamental DNA of your school. And that's why I'm a seamless fit. And you do that, that's what separates groupies from rock stars in the end, for the most part. All right, let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so you're rejected, when you're done crying into your pillow in the midst of the night, what can you do, right? And what I would say is that, well, the very first thing you should do after you take a breather, right, is to try and ascertain what on earth went wrong. Now, I've given you a little insight. That's, part of that is attending this presentation, so you're making the right moves already. But what I would say is that you definitely want to reach out to the admissions committee to see if they'll provide you feedback on your rejection, right? Now, not all admissions committees do that, to be perfectly honest with you. And even if some do provide you feedback, sometimes they're a little guarded, right? So, um, so they may provide you. If they do provide you, set up a time to speak with them, of course. You want to do this sooner than later, but you have to understand that they may be busy up until May or June, right? On your app. Some will give you some immediate feedback. Some will want to set up a one-on-one session with you, and others will not give you any feedback at all, and be prepared for that, right? And straight up, some schools like INSEAD will email you back and tell you, don't apply again. It's, I'm not sure if they still do that today, this year, but they were doing it in years past, or they're like, don't reapply. I guess I respect that sort of transparency and forthrightness. But anyway, so see what schools will provide you feedback, see if they'll set up a one-on-one, then schedule the one-on-one, right? Now, you want to do this. Okay, so you want to do this because obviously if you're rejected in the second or third rounds of this year, you want to reapply in round 1 or 2, but really round 1 of the subsequent application season. And the reason why you want to try to get feedback sooner than later is so that you can take action, right? If they want you, and usually a lot of times what it comes down to, if you have all your ducks in a row, more or less, let's say, meaning you have all your goals set up properly, is they may want you to retake the GMAT or GRE, right? So you're going to need time to study for that and all that good stuff, right? But if they do give you feedback that your goals were wacky or a bit off, then you're going to need, or that you need more international exposure, or you need more operating or operations exposure. I see that with a lot of guys who get rejected that worked in VC or PE, right? Then you want to have to, let's say you may even take that externship or secondment or whatever it's called, field trip out to a portfolio company, right? You're going to need time, or an office in New York if you're working, currently in Mumbai, right? So you're going to need to do all that and set that all up. So get that feedback sooner than later, and then make it happen. Because if you get feedback and you don't act upon it, the admissions committee will know, and it will not look that great, right? And to be honest with you, if you cannot act upon their feedback, you can't get a higher GMAT score. You can't do, you can't do a study, whatever, a work abroad assignment, right? Then you have to consider whether or not you really do want to reapply to that school. Anyway, but just give yourself enough time to fix the problems that you see. Okay. The other thing I would do too is reach out to alumni. If you had a good rapport with your interviewer, um, current student or alumni, reach out to him or her and see if they'll provide you some rudimentary feedback, right? Don't make it awkward, but just see, right? See if they have any suggestions. I wouldn't call it feedback. See if they have any suggestions for you, right? They may only know your resume, right? But just see. If you know or have met current students there, yeah, sure. Give them, see if they'll take a look at your essays, right? If they haven't already, but just see if they've taken just whatever. Just keep engaging the school, keep showing up to the events. Um, and also, and here's a little bit of a cooler, here's a little bit of a throwing a little rain on the parade here. You have to also understand that admissions committees, alumni, current students, they may give you feedback, but they may not be completely transparent or be completely forthright in what they're telling you. So admissions committees will never ever, here's an example, right? They'll never, if they give you feedback, they'll never ever tell you what your bosses said about you in the recommendation. They won't tell you most of the time, the overwhelming majority of the time, that there was an issue, a specific issue with your recommendation. They may say, yeah, the recommendation could have been stronger, or they may say, we didn't understand why you provided us with this recommender because, you never worked with them before, right? It was your mom's friend or your dad's friend or your uncle. So they may say that, but they will never point to specifics in the actual recommendation letter, right? Now, anyway, so just keep in mind there's a little bit, they can't reveal all their cards. And then also, when you get all the feedback, does their feedback hit on any one of these three main reasons that I talked about today? And go back and re-engineer your goals, or re-engineer your understanding of the school. Anyway, that is, yeah, and start doing that now, right? Because you probably just received your reject notice for round 2 or round 1. All right, so let's see if we have any questions. I'm looking at the live comments stream here. I don't necessarily see any, but if there are no more comments or questions, right, feel free to email me. If anybody wants to talk about why they got dinged on a call, I can do that as well. But just email me here, and we'll go from there. I believe this presentation will be made available, the slides, for download at some point. So look for that link as well. Anyway, thanks for joining me today. I plan on doing several more of these presentations over the next few months with GMAT Club. So check your email, and I will talk to you later.